A gunshot cracked through the blizzard. Then silence, a silence thicker than blood. On the snow plains of Wyoming Territory, December 1883, a long trail of red dragged itself toward the dark line of ponderosa pines. Two bodies lay close together at the end of that trail, clothing frozen solid into sheets of ice. Black hair spread across the snow, each strand frozen separately, as if the cold had stopped time at the exact moment they fell. Around the wrist of the woman in front, a rope. Thin, frayed by cold, the cut end still trailing in the snow, severed by a blade, not torn by struggle. Someone had tied them together. Not the storm, not an accident. Someone wanted them dead, and wanted them never found apart. Somewhere behind the pines, a figure stood watching, motionless, waiting from across the white field. A rider on a gray horse emerged through the driving snow. Boots came down, sinking knee-deep, 40 years old, a wool coat worn through at the left elbow. The eyes of a man who had buried his wife 7 winters ago, and had never once stopped counting the days. A bare hand pressed against the throat of the first woman. A pulse, faint, but there, he exhaled, turned toward the second face, and his hand froze in midair. Gideon Marsh had lived through 11 Wyoming winters. He knew this cold. The way it arrived without announcement. The way it settled into the bones of the land, and the bones of a man like it intended to stay, like it had paid rent and expected to be treated accordingly. He was 40 years old. He moved like someone who had learned to waste nothing. Not energy, not words, not the particular kind of grief that doesn't announce itself either, just arrives, settles, stays. His coat was dark wool, worn through at the left elbow, repaired twice with thread that didn't match, because matching thread had not seemed important at the time and still didn't. His hat brim collected snow the way a roof collects rain. Patient, heavy, uncomplaining. The horse, a gray quarter horse named Abel, plodded forward without drama. Gideon appreciated that about Abel. No opinions, no hesitation. Just forward motion through whatever the world decided to throw at them this particular December, which was considerable. He'd been checking the north fence line for 3 days running, not because he wanted to be out here, because a rancher who ignores his fences loses cattle. And Gideon Marsh could not absorb another loss. Not this season. Not any season, if he was being truthful with himself, which he tried to be, even when the truth was not especially comfortable. The homestead sat 4 miles east of the Laramie foothills, 43 acres of hard ground, 2 creeks, a stand of ponderosa pine running along the northern edge, dark and weighted with snow. A cabin he and Nora had built together in the summer of 1876. With her own hands, Gideon had done the heavy work. Nora had done everything else, which turned out to be the larger portion. She'd come from Boston. People always said that with a specific look, as though Boston explained something, as though it were a condition rather than a city. Nora had not cared what people said. She had wanted the real West, not the dime novel version, the actual ground, the actual sky, the horizon that went on long enough to make a person feel both very small and, strangely, free. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. She had also gotten 5 Wyoming winters before the fever came in the 5th one. And Gideon could not stop it, no matter how much wood he split, or water he boiled, or prayers he pushed into a sky that was not. That particular winter, listening. She had been gone 7 years. 7 years, 2 months, 11 days. Not that he was counting, except that he was. The way a person counts the steps from the cabin door to the well. Not deliberately, just because some distances get built into how you move. The cabin, when he was not in it, sat exactly as Nora had left it. Her copper kettle on the hook above the stove, her sewing basket beside the eastern window, where the morning light came in best, the thread inside still organized by color, smallest spool to largest, the way she always kept it. Her quilt, gray-blue wool, hand-dyed with wild sage, folded at the foot of the bed, edges matched, corners squared 7 years. He still folded it the same way. People in town had offered their thoughts on this. Mrs. Alcott at the dry goods store had suggested, once in her gentlest voice, that it might be time to put some of Nora's things away, that keeping everything as it was might be making the grief harder. Gideon had thanked her, and then gone home and folded the quilt the same way he always folded it. Because here was what he had not been able to explain to Mrs. Alcott, or to his brother-in-law who had visited from Cheyenne and left after 3 days looking unsettled, or to any of the well-meaning people who had offered their opinions on his particular brand of not moving on. He was not keeping those things because of grief. He was keeping them because without them he genuinely did not know what shape his life had. Nora had been the one who knew what things meant. She could look at a piece of ground and see what it wanted to grow. Look at a broken fence post and know whether it needed replacing or just straightening. Look at Gideon, quiet, difficult, not especially easy to know, and see something worth the effort. Without her, he was just a man in a cold cabin, checking fences that kept breaking. Abel stopped, not gradually, not with warning, just stopped. The way a horse stops when something ahead does not belong. Gideon felt the tension move through the animal before he understood it. Up through the saddle, into his own spine. That specific stiffening that meant, something is wrong with what is ahead of us. He straightened, narrowed his eyes against the driving white. The snow was moving sideways, the kind that made distances unreliable. Things appeared closer than they were, or farther, or not at all. He scanned the white, the ponderosa pines to the northwest, the ridge beyond, barely visible, the north pasture, unmarked and flat and clean, except 2 shapes near the edge of the tree line, low to the ground, close together, too irregular for deadfall, too large for deer. Gideon had found bodies before. It happened out here. Men who misjudged the distance to the next town. Travelers who thought they knew the weather better than the weather knew itself. Once, a boy not older than 17, who had gotten turned around in a spring storm and walked the wrong direction. For 2 days before the cold finished what the confusion started, that one had stayed with him. Still did. He nudged Abel forward, slowly, because whatever was out there deserved slow approach, because hurrying toward the unknown in a Wyoming December was how you made a difficult situation dangerous, because one of the shapes moved, barely. Almost nothing, but something. His heels pressed into Abel's sides and the horse surged forward, snow kicking up, and Gideon was already calculating distance, temperature, how long a person could survive unconscious in this wind. He reached them, dismounted, before Abel had fully stopped. Snow to his knees on the first step. His gloves already coming off. 2 people, lying close. Their clothing frozen solid, stiff with ice. Dark hair spread in the snow and frozen there, each strand individual and still, like the cold had stopped time at the precise moment they fell. He knelt beside the nearest one, turned her gently. A woman young, Apache. Her face, even in the gray winter light, even beneath the frost, extraordinary in its stillness, her eyelashes frozen shut. Her lips pale and almost colorless. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck, a pulse. Faint, slow, but there he exhaled, and then looked at the second woman, and the breath he had just released stayed out, because the second face was the same face, same bone structure, same jaw, same dark brows crusted with ice, same mouth, same angle of cheekbone, same everything, not some similar, identical twins in a Wyoming blizzard. Near his fence line, both alive, both barely. He checked the second woman the same way. Pulse. Weaker but present. His mind ran the arithmetic fast. Abel could not carry 3 people safely through knee-deep snow. He knew this the way he knew which fence posts needed replacing and which just needed straightening. Practical certainty. No calculation required. He looked at the 2 women, at the distance back to the cabin, at the ropes, which was when he noticed what he should have seen immediately and hadn't, because he had been focused on breath and pulse and the mathematics of survival. Thin rope, fraying from cold, but still knotted, still present, around the first woman's wrist, the cut end trailing in the snow, as if someone had cut it deliberately, or as if something had broken it, or as if his one jaw tightened. Someone had tied them together. Not a storm, not accident, not the impersonal cruelty of Wyoming December. Someone had done this. He stood, turned a slow circle, scanned the tree line and the ridge in every direction of white. Nothing moved. Just wind, just snow. He looked back at the two women. "Do the next thing," Nora would have said. "Not everything. Just the next thing." He unwound his coat, wrapped it around the smaller of the two women, the one with the weaker pulse, and lifted her. She was lighter than he expected. He settled her across Abel with all the care he had, kept one hand on her back, went for the other one. The first woman stirred when he lifted her. Just a sharp exhale, pain registering somewhere below consciousness. "I know," he thought. "Just stay with me." He got them both positioned the best he could, took Abel's reins, started walking, into the wind, into the white, 4 miles. His coat on someone else's back, the cold going through his flannel shirt like it was nothing. He did not think about the cold. He thought about the rope. The cabin was dark when he reached it. Of course it was. He'd been gone all day. No lamp, no fire, nothing waiting. He brought them in first, both of them, one at a time, moving fast. Laid them on the braided rug near the fireplace. Nora's rug. The colors faded now to something softer than the original, which somehow suited the moment. Then he built the fire. His hands were shaking. Not from cold. From the specific tremor that comes when urgency drops away, just enough that your body remembers it's human. The fire caught, grew. Heat pushed outward in slow increments. He heated water, found the extra blankets in the cedar chest, wrapped both women carefully, checked their hands. Fingertips pale but not black, not the worst. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at them. In firelight, the similarity between them was even more striking than it had been in the gray stormlight. Not just the faces, the way they had moved toward each other, even in unconsciousness. The one with the slightly stronger pulse had shifted, turning slightly toward her sister. Some navigational system below waking had pointed her in the right direction. He looked at their clothing now that there was light enough to see it properly. One, buckskin, soft leather, earth-colored, a deep ochre brown that caught the firelight and held it warm. The kind of hide that took months to tan correctly. Fringe along the sleeves, each strip cut even. Ice-crusted now, but beneath it the color was still true. Late summer ground across the chest and along the hem, beadwork. Turquoise, real turquoise, not glass imitation, set in patterns that carried meaning he didn't have the language to read. The beads caught the firelight differently than the leather. Small points of blue-green in the amber warmth. Around her neck, silver, not a chain. A collar of worked silver with more turquoise inset, the craftsmanship more deliberate than anything in a Cheyenne shop. Old work, or work made by someone who had learned from someone old. Both women's hair was braided. 2 braids each, long and dark. The braids were still intact despite everything. Whatever the storm had done to the rest of them, the braids held. He did not touch anything he did not need to touch. He watched them breathe, in, out, getting steadier. He added another log, and waited. The first one woke just past midnight. He knew before he looked. Abel shifted in the barn. That particular restless movement that meant something nearby had changed. Horses noticed things first. He looked up from the stool where he'd been half dozing and found himself being watched, dark eyes. Fully open, fully alert. Not the slow surface of someone waking from natural sleep. This was a person who had snapped into consciousness like a spring-loaded trap, aware, orienting. The room sweeping in a single comprehensive scan, ceiling, walls, door, Gideon, and stopping at Gideon. He did not move. Smart, he thought, to hold still. When someone wakes afraid and finds a stranger, sudden movement is exactly wrong. So he sat on his stool and let her look. She assessed him the way he would assess a ridge before crossing it. Methodical, no obvious fear, though he knew the fear was there, had to be there. But underneath it, something steadier. Something that had been in this kind of situation before. Her gaze moved to her sister. Something shifted in her face. The precise, controlled quality of someone who had been afraid of what they'd find when they looked, and found against expectation that the thing they feared had not come to pass. Then she looked back at him. He kept his hands visible. Voice low, "You're safe. This is my home. I found you in the snow. Nothing. My name is Gideon Marsh. This is my land. You're 4 miles from where I found you. Still nothing." Eyes on him. Steady. Unreadable. He nodded toward the stove. "There's warm broth. When you want it," he stood slowly. Made every movement visible. Ladled broth into a clay bowl. Set it on the floor halfway between himself and the two women. Walked back to the stool. Sat. She watched him do all of it. After a moment, long enough that he had given up expecting anything, she sat up, slowly. He could see it cost her. A slight catch in the breathing that suggested ribs that were not happy. She reached for the bowl. Her hands were steadier than they had any right to be. She held the broth, looked into it, drank. Deliberate. Like she had decided to be intentional about even this. When she finished, she set the bowl down. Precisely. In the same spot she had taken it from. Then she looked at Gideon and said, in English so clean, it caught him genuinely off guard. "My name is Dessa, a beat. She is Ama, Gideon Marsh. You said that already." "I did." Something crossed her expression. Not amusement, but in the vicinity of it, her sister stirred then. Fingers first, then a breath that changed quality. Dessa was already turning before Ama was fully awake, one hand on her sister's arm. Steadying, Ama's eyes opened. Where Dessa's waking had been immediate and controlled, Ama's was slower. She blinked. Took in the ceiling, the fire, her sister's face. Then she spoke in Apache. Low and urgent. Clearly a question, Dessa answered. Brief, quiet. Gideon couldn't follow the language, but he read the shape of it. "Where are we?" "Safe. How did we get here?" "A man found us." "Is he?" "Not yet determined." Ama turned and found him. Her eyes were the same shape as Dessa's. Same dark, considering quality. But where Dessa's gaze had been a scan, strategic, comprehensive, Ama's settled with different weight. Less like assessment, more like reading. Like she was looking for something specific, and was willing to take the time required to find it. Then she said, in English with a slightly softer quality than her sister's, "My fingers are fine." A pause. "It's my left side that won't cooperate." Gideon straightened. "Left side. Which ribs?" "The ones that hurt," Ama said. And at his expression, "Third and fourth. Maybe fifth. I need to look at that." "With your permission," Dessa's hand did not leave her sister's arm. "With her permission," Gideon corrected, directing himself to Ama. Ama looked at him for another moment. Said something to Dessa in Apache. Dessa's jaw tightened, barely perceptibly. But she moved her hand. He crouched beside Ama and worked carefully, pressing lightly, reading her face for the involuntary responses that told him more than any description would. 2 ribs, possibly a third. Not breaks, fractures, but fractures from impact and cold, he thought first. Then he looked at the bruising, deep purple-green. Old enough to have developed color. Not from the ground when she fell from before, from a blow. He sat back on his heels, looked at Dessa, who was looking back at him with eyes that were waiting, specifically waiting, to see what he did with what he had just found. "This bruising," he said carefully. "It didn't happen today." "No," Dessa said. "It didn't." The fire settled. "I'm going to wrap the left side," he said. "It'll stabilize the fractures and reduce the pain with breathing." "That's all I'm doing." Dessa looked at Ama. Ama nodded. He worked with methodical gentleness. When he finished, Ama's breathing eased slightly. The cost of each breath reduced. He stood, moved back. "Sleep if you can," he said. "You're safe. I'll keep the fire." Dessa looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she said. "Just that." One word, he thought about it honestly. "Because I found you," he said. "And finding means something," she watched him. "In any country," he added. "Far as I'm concerned." Another silence. Then Dessa turned, said something low to Ama, pulled the blanket up over her sister with the automatic precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times. Ama, reached up briefly and touched her sister's hand. Both of them closed their eyes. Gideon added wood to the fire, sat back down, and waited for morning the way he had been waiting for things for 7 years. Patient, present, not expecting anything in particular to change, not knowing yet that everything already had. Morning came sideways, the way Wyoming December mornings do. Not a sunrise, a slow darkening of the dark into something that was marginally less dark. Gideon was at the stove when Dessa woke the second time. He heard her shift, heard the creak of the floorboard just inside the braided rug, the one he had been meaning to fix for 3 years, and knew she was at the window before he turned. He kept stirring the oats. Northeast, he said, not turning. Ridge is about 1.5 miles. North pasture in the creek between here and there. Nothing else. A pause. Fence line runs east-west, 1/2 mile out, broken in 2 places from the storm. My fence posts. Not another man's land. Another pause. Trail south, goes through the timber, comes out on the main road in 4 miles. Deep with snow right now, but passable. He turned. She was standing exactly as he had imagined, upright, hands easy at her sides. Her clothing, the ochre buckskin, the fringe still carrying residual ice at the edges. The turquoise beadwork startling against the pale December light. Looked different in daylight than it had in firelight, more itself. The blue-green of the beads sharp and real. Like summer kept somewhere and brought out unexpectedly. One braid slightly loosened from sleep. A strand at her temple she had not fixed. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who had expected one thing and found another. You could have told me where the trail south was, she said. Instead of the fence lines. You were looking northeast, Gideon said. So I started northeast. She was quiet a moment. You are not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? She didn't answer that. Which was an answer. He turned back to the oats. Breakfast soon. Your sister needs to eat, he heard her move to Ama. The quiet exchange in Apache, that compressed, efficient language of 2 people who have spoken to each other long enough that the words don't need to carry all the weight because the spaces between they do. Gideon had had something like that with Nora. By the end of the 3rd year, whole conversations in a look across a room. He hadn't thought about it in a long time. He set 2 bowls on the table. Dessa helped Ama to the bench, supporting her left side. Ama moved carefully but moved. Looked at the bowl of oats. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Gideon said. It's plain oats. I'm not much of a cook. It's warm, Ama said. That's enough. They ate. He stood near the stove with his own bowl and watched without being obvious about it. The way they moved through the meal, unhurried, finishing everything. The way Dessa tracked Ama, without looking at her directly. Peripheral, constant. And the way Ama kept looking at the objects in the cabin, the copper kettle, the sewing basket, the quilt folded at the foot of the bed. She looked at the quilt a moment longer than the others. When the bowls were empty, Dessa set hers down and looked at him. We should tell you how we came to be in your snow, she said. When you're ready, we're ready now. He put his bowl on the shelf, pulled the second chair from against the wall, the one he never used, and sat down. Dessa reached into the front of her dress and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Set it on the table between them. Not a weapon's reach. Not a gift. Just information, placed where he could receive it. Our band was moving south when this came, she said. A man brought it. Federal agent. Said we had 30 days to vacate the territory. Gideon looked at the paper but didn't touch it yet. When we didn't move fast enough, Dessa continued, he came back with men, not soldiers, his own men, and they made the point differently. Ama's hands, around her empty bowl, tightened briefly. We were separated from the others. Running. The storm was starting. We made it as far north as your tree line before we couldn't make it further. He reached forward and picked up the paper. Read it carefully. Official language. The kind that has been sharpened to a specific purpose. Every word chosen to sound reasonable while meaning something that wasn't reasonable at all. He read to the signature, Aldous Prentice. Federal Land Agent, Wyoming Territory. He set the paper down, slowly, because his hands had done something he didn't intend, tightened around the edges, and he needed to release that before he put it down. Dessa was watching him. "You know that name," she said. "Not a question. He came here 2 years ago, wanted to buy my North 40, and—" I said no. The words sat in the room. Dessa looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not dramatically, but something. "He didn't stop because you said no," she said. "I know he stopped because you weren't the first obstacle." "We were." The fire settled. A log shifted. "He will come back," Dessa said. "For the land. For us. For whatever he decides is unfinished." Gideon looked at the paper. At Prentice's name at the bottom. At the official seal that made everything above it legal. Or at least legal-looking, which in 1883 Wyoming was often the same thing. He had met Aldous Prentice once, 2 years ago, polite, well-dressed, patient. The kind of man who explained things in a measured voice that made you feel the disagreement was yours to resolve. He had stood in this cabin and looked around with the mild, appreciative expression of a man who understood property values. He had looked at Nora's copper kettle, at the sewing basket, at the quilt, and Gideon had felt, without being able to name it at the time, a specific kind of cold that had nothing to do with Wyoming December. He looked at Dessa then, at Ama, who had been watching him throughout. That reading attention. She spoke now. "The rope on my sister's wrist," she said quietly. "You saw it." "Yes. His men left us that way. So we couldn't separate. If one fell, the other would fall with her." The careful flat delivery of someone reporting a fact, not performing a wound. He didn't want bodies found apart. He wanted it to look like the storm took us. Gideon was very still. "If we were found at all," Ama added. The wind pushed against the north wall. The fire answered. Long silence. The three of them understanding something together that none of them had to say. He thought about Nora. About the last coherent thing she'd said that he was meant to carry. "You know what's right. You've always known. You just wait too long to do it." He folded the paper, set it on the table. "You'll stay here," he said, "until you're strong enough to make a decision that isn't made from a dead run." He looked at both of them. "No conditions." Dessa's expression was careful. "This will complicate your life, Mr. Marsh." "My life," Gideon said, "has been uncomplicated for 7 years. A beat. I'm starting to think that wasn't the virtue I thought it was." He went to the barn that afternoon. Abel needed water. The storm had frozen the barrel solid. He broke the ice, filled the trough, stood with his hand on the horse's neck in the cold gray quiet, and let himself think. About Prentice. About the word legal. About the gap between legal and right that in 1883 Wyoming Territory was sometimes so wide you could lose a whole people in it. About Dessa and Ama inside his cabin. About the rope end in the snow. About Ama's ribs and the bruising that had been there before the cold arrived. About what Nora would have done. Which was not actually a complicated question when he stopped avoiding it. She would have done exactly this. Faster and with more certainty. And probably with a better meal ready before he'd finished thinking about it. He patted Abel's neck once, went back inside. Dessa was at the east window, the one with the best view of the approach from the main road. Ama was at the table with a piece of paper from his writing shelf and a pencil, moving it carefully across the surface. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She didn't look up. The land. He moved to where he could see over her shoulder without crowding her. The creek, the ridge, the tree line. The distances were slightly off. Memory of landscape seen in the dark and the storm. But the relationships were right. The way the creek bent north before widening. The way the ridge stepped down in 2 stages. She knew this land, not as a stranger who'd passed through it. As someone who had read it before. He straightened. Said nothing. She looked up at him. "My grandmother was born 3 miles from where you found us." A pause. "This wasn't empty ground when your people came. It looked empty." To people who didn't know how to read it, Gideon stood with that for a moment. I didn't know that, he said. Ama looked at him. Not with anger, not with accusation, with something harder to receive in its way, just the plain fact of it. Offered without performance. Most don't, she said. That's not cruelty. But not knowing doesn't make the harm smaller. He nodded. She looked back at her drawing. He moved to the stove and started the evening meal. Outside, the wind dropped. The snow slowed to something quieter. The kind that settles rather than drives, in the cabin, the fire. The lamp he'd lit on the table, the scratch of Ama's pencil, Dessa's quiet presence at the window, the copper kettle beginning to steam, the folded paper with Prentice's name at the bottom, and Gideon Marsh, 40 years old. 7 years alone, with the specific sensation of a man who has been standing very still for a very long time and has just, without exactly choosing it, begun to move. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5. Something shifted in the cabin. Not dramatically, not the way storms shift things. More the way a room shifts when someone opens a window that's been closed all winter. Slow. Incremental. The air uncertain whether to trust the change. Dessa healed faster than Gideon expected, which probably should not have surprised him. She moved through recovery the way she moved through everything, with intent. Like it was a task that needed completing, rather than a condition that needed enduring. By the second morning, she was on her feet without help. By the third, she was sweeping ash from the hearth before he'd finished his coffee. By the fourth, she had reorganized his tool shelf in a way that made more sense than the way he'd had it for 7 years, and had not asked his permission to do so. He didn't say anything about the tool shelf, partly because she wasn't wrong, and partly because he found, and this genuinely surprised him, that he didn't mind. 7 years of minding everything. 7 years of the cabin exactly as it was. The tools where he'd put them. The days following each other in a sequence so predictable, he could tell the time by what his hands were doing. He'd called this discipline. Management. The serious organization of a serious life. He was beginning to understand it had been something else. Ama was slower. The ribs determined the pace of everything. She couldn't lift, couldn't twist without that intake of breath that meant something was still moving. That shouldn't. But she sat at the table for hours with her pencil and her paper, mapping. Correcting distances as her memory sorted itself out, adding detail, where the limestone pushed through the soil, where the water table came close to the surface, where the deer moved in winter. Knowledge that had been put into her by people who'd read this land for generations. Gideon watched her work without commenting, because them watched her work with extraordinary. And because he was not entirely sure what it meant, and he had learned over the years that the things he wasn't sure about deserved more watching and less talking. What he was sure about was this: Aldous Prentice would come back. Not a question, not a fear, a fact. The kind you build a plan around. Prentice was not the kind of man who abandoned an objective because the first approach met resistance. He was the kind who went away and returned with more preparation, added to existing patience, who appeared reasonable until he didn't need to anymore, who smiled in your cabin and looked at your dead wife's things and then sent men to do in the dark what he couldn't do openly. The storm had covered the tracks. He was fairly sure of that, but fairly sure. In Wyoming winter, with those stakes. Was not anywhere near sure enough. On the 6th morning, Dessa came out of the sleeping area and stopped in the middle of the room, looked at the east window, then at Gideon. She's been awake since before the dark lifted, Dessa said. She does this when she's thinking about something she doesn't know how to say yet. Gideon looked at his coffee. Does it usually come out? Always. A pause. Whether or not it should, he almost smiled. Almost. Ama emerged an hour later, sat at the table, looked at her map, then at Gideon. I need to tell you something about what Prentice actually wants. He put down his coffee. It's not just the land, Ama said. Not ours. Not yours either. She smoothed her hand across the map. There's a northern railroad route being surveyed through this territory. Through these foothills, her finger traced a line. Your North 40 is the narrowest approach. The only place where the grade is workable. He looked at the line her finger had drawn. He thought about Prentice, about the offer, about the number on that paper, generous enough to be suspicious. The kind of number that only made sense if what was underneath the land was worth considerably more than the land itself. He didn't buy it, Gideon said. No, so he has to clear it. Everything in the path, Ama said. Every claim, every person withstanding to object a beat, including 2 women who could put his name to specific acts. In a territory court, the fire, the wind, Dessa standing near the doorway, arms crossed. Not looking at Gideon, looking at her sister, and Gideon understanding, arriving at it the way he arrived at most things, not quickly but completely, that this changed everything about the shape of the problem. He had thought he was sheltering 2 women from a violent man. He was sheltering 2 women who were the difference between a violent man facing consequences and that same man building an empire from cleared ground and compliant silence. He set down his coffee cup. The removal order, he said. Is there anything else? Ama looked at Dessa. That quick, dense conversation without language. Then she reached into the folded blanket beside her and withdrew something small. A piece of folded leather, soft and dark with handling. She opened it on the table. Papers. Several. Different hands. Different dates, letters, Dessa said. Between Prentice and the railroad surveyor. Our elder gathered them over 2 years. Evidence of what was planned. What was already arranged before the removal order was even signed. Gideon looked at the papers, at the dates, at the names. He was not a lawyer. Not formally educated in any way that would matter in a courtroom. But he had read enough, in 7 solitary Wyoming winters, to understand what he was looking at. This was not the record of one man's excess. This was the paper trail of a scheme that went beyond Prentice, beyond Wyoming territory. He folded the leather back over them. Carefully. These need to reach a federal judge, he said. Not county. We know that, Dessa said. Cheyenne, we know that too. It's a long way, in this weather. With your sister, not. I know what my sister is, Dessa said. Flat, precise, not unkind. Absolute. You don't need to finish that sentence. He looked at her. She looked back, and this was the thing he had not been prepared for. Because you could prepare for threats, for cold, for difficult decisions, for danger with visible shape. You could not prepare for a woman who looked at you like that, like she was reading something beneath the words, like she had already seen through to the part you hadn't said yet, like she was completely unimpressed by the performance of competence, while simultaneously, and this was the part that actually got to him, paying attention to the man underneath the performance. He cleared his throat. We'll figure out, Cheyenne, he said, when it's time. And until then? Until then, Gideon said, we make this place harder to take apart than it currently is. That afternoon, splitting wood behind the cabin, not because they were short on wood, because it was the kind of work that let him think without thinking about the thinking. Dessa appeared at the corner of the barn. She was wearing his spare coat over her buckskin dress. He'd offered it 2 days ago without ceremony. She'd accepted it the same way. The coat was too large. The sleeves hung past her wrists. She'd folded them back twice, with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making do. She had 2 pieces of firewood under one arm. She set them on the stack. Stood and looked at the ridge. Gideon split another log. Let the silence settle. What do you see, he said, actually asking movement. Maybe, an hour ago, near the timber line. Could be deer. He set down the axe. Looked, the ridge was still, pale gray-white. The pines dark and weighted. Or, he said, or someone watching to see if smoke rises from this chimney at the same time every day. A beat. Which it does. He stood with that. Because she was right. 7 years of the same schedule. Fire at the same hour. Breakfast, fence work, barn, evening meal, fire down. Predictable as the seasons, which was a virtue he'd always told himself, which was also, he now understood, a map of his habits. And maps could be very useful to the wrong people. How do we change it? He said. You're asking me. You know this kind of problem better than I do. Something shifted in her face. Not surprise. In the vicinity of it, vary the smoke, she said. Morning fire before light, let it die. Rebuild at midday, make the pattern unreadable. She looked at the barn. And we stop leaving one set of prints to the woodpile. Different paths. Make it look like more people. Or fewer. Depending on what they expect, he nodded. This was not caution. This was practiced, field-tested intelligence. Knowledge earned by living in a world where predictability could be the last predictable thing you ever did. The creek. The creek, she said. Does it freeze solid? The edges. Center runs under, wide enough to cross on foot? If you know where, show me. Tomorrow when Ama is rested. I want to know every approach to this cabin. Every way in. Every way out. A pause. The way you know it. And the way I know it. Together, he picked up the axe again. Because his hands needed something to hold, while his mind adjusted to the specific fact of being asked to share knowledge of his own land. Not take it, share it, as equal parts of a shared problem. All right, he said. She went back inside. He split the next log harder than necessary. On the 10th day, they walked the creek, all three of them. Ama with a walking stick Gideon had cut from a fallen pine, slower but present, determined. He showed them where the ice held and where it didn't. The shallow crossings. The bank low enough for a horse. The timber stand that muffled sound from the north, so you heard movement from the south first. Dessa showed him things he hadn't seen in 7 years of living here. The ridge to the north had a natural break, about a third of the way along. Not obvious unless you knew to look for it. But from the right angle it gave a sight line all the way to the main road. She'd seen it from the timber line while running. Filed it away. Because that was what she did. Ama stopped at a place where the creek bank rose slightly. Here, she said. He'd walked past this spot 1,000 times. The ground is different, she said. Can you feel it? He stepped to where she stood, pressed his boot down. The ground gave differently. A slight resonance underneath. There's a spring, Ama said. Frozen now. But come April, you'll have water this side of the cabin without going to the main creek. Not more than 4 feet down, if you dig the right place. He looked at the ground. How do you know that? She looked at the grass poking through snow. At the way the ice crystals had formed differently, here than 10 feet in either direction. At things so small he had walked over them for 7 years without registering. My grandmother showed me how to read ground like this, she said. Her mother showed her. He thought about that. About the generations of knowledge in the way she had pressed her foot into the snow. About what it meant to carry knowledge in your body rather than in books. About what had nearly been lost in the storm. Ama, he said. She looked at him. I'm glad you're alive, he said, plainly. Without embellishment. Both of you. I want to say that and mean it to be heard. She looked at him for a long moment. We know, she said. That's why we trust you. Dessa, 3 steps away, was looking at the ridge. She didn't turn around. But he saw her shoulders move, just slightly. The small, involuntary adjustment of someone absorbing something they had not been prepared to feel. The wind off the ridge was cold and clean. The 3 of them stood by the frozen creek in Wyoming territory, December 1883, and something, not yet nameable, not yet fully formed, but real and getting realer, settled over the homestead like the quiet after the last of a storm. Not peace exactly, but the first honest hour of something that might become it. That evening, after supper, after Ama had gone to lie down, after the lamp was turned low and the fire was banked, Dessa sat at the table. Gideon sat across from her, which was new. He'd been sitting on the stool by the wall. This was the table, the chair he never used. The one that had been pushed against the wall for 7 years like a thing waiting to be needed. Neither of them commented on it. She was looking at her hands. Then the window. Then the folded leather with the papers. He was looking at his coffee. How long were you walking? He said. Before I found you, she was quiet a moment. Long enough that I had stopped being afraid of dying, she said. That's usually a bad sign, usually. When you stop being afraid of something, part of you has accepted it. That's when you're most in danger. You stop fighting it the right way, he thought about that. She was losing ground faster than me, Dessa said. The ribs. Breathing in cold costs more when something's broken. I knew if I stopped, we'd both stop. A pause. Until we did. The fire, the wind. How long have you been doing that? Gideon said. Moving when you should stop. Keeping her going? Dessa looked at him. Since we were born, she said, 7 words. The entire shape of something, compressed to its minimum, which was how truth was most powerful. Gideon looked at the table. I had someone like that, he said. Not the same. But someone who kept me going when I'd have stopped. A pause. I stopped anyway, after she was gone. Just differently. Slower. Dessa watched him. The things in this cabin, she said. The kettle, the sewing basket, the quilt, hers. You kept them all. Exactly as they were. He looked up. You're about to tell me what that means. I'm not. She paused. Looked at her hands. I know what it means. I'm recognizing it. He waited when our elder died, she said. 2 winters ago. I kept his pipe in the exact place he always left it. I moved around it, never touched it, never moved it. A pause. Because if it was still there, the world still had the shape of someone who had been there. Gideon said nothing, because she had just said the thing he had not been able to say in 7 years. Not to anyone. Not even to himself most days. The world still had the shape of someone who had been there. Yes, that, exactly that, he stood. Not abruptly, moved to the fire. Added a log that didn't particularly need adding. After a moment, Dessa said, I moved the pipe eventually. What did you do with it? Gave it to a young man who was learning to be patient. He needed it more than I needed to keep the shape. Gideon looked at the fire. At the copper kettle on the hook. At the glow of the coals. There's a quilt, he said. On the bed. Nora's. She made it our first winter here. She was still learning the loom, and it shows. The tension's uneven in places, some rows not quite straight. She knew that. She called it her honest quilt. Said it was honest because you could see where she was still figuring things out. He stopped. Dessa waited. Ama should have it, he said. The cold gets into those ribs at night. I can hear her adjusting, trying to find a position that doesn't pull. She needs more weight. A pause. Not a blanket. A proper quilt. Dessa went completely still. It's still yours, she said carefully. If you give it, it doesn't stop being what it was. I know that. You're sure? He turned from the fire. Looked at her. I haven't been sure of much in 7 years, he said. But I'm sure of that. He went to the bed, lifted the quilt. The weight of it in his hands was different than he expected. Not heavier. Something else. Not lighter. Just different. Like it had changed what it was without him being present for the change. He carried it to the sleeping area. Ama was awake. Often was at this hour managing. She looked up when he came in. He held out the quilt. She took it carefully. Spread it over herself. Her hands moved across the surface, the way her hands always moved across things. Reading. The uneven tension. The places where Nora had been still figuring things out. She was still learning, Ama said quietly. When she made this, yes. But she finished it. She always finished what she started. Ama looked at him. In the low lamplight, her face was softer than it was in daylight. The constant alertness eased back. She sounds like someone who understood what mattered. She did. Better than me. Most of the time, he left the lamp burning low. Went back to the main room. Dessa was still at the table. She looked at him when he came back. Just looked. He sat down. And the cabin held them. The 3 of them. The quilt doing its work in the other room. The fire doing its work here. The copper kettle on its hook, exactly where Nora had left it. In a silence that was the closest thing to peace that Gideon Marsh had allowed himself in a very long time. Aldous Prentice arrived on the 8th day, mid-morning. Clear sky, brutal cold. Gideon saw him from the barn, a single rider coming from the south, turning onto the homestead track, moving at the pace of someone who expected to be welcomed. Gideon watched him come, then went inside. Company, he said, 2 words. Dessa was at the east window in 3 steps. Looked. Turned. Prentice. Yes. Something moved across her face. Fast. Gone before he could name it. Root cellar, Dessa said. I know, don't let Metis, I know. And Gideon. She stopped. His given name was new between them. They'd been careful about that until this moment. Don't tell him anything he can verify by looking. I know that too. She held his gaze 1 second longer than strictly necessary. Then she and Ama were moving toward the back. Gideon went to the door. Prentice dismounted at the fence post. Tied his horse with the ease of a man who assumed his welcome. Dressed well for the cold. Better than the cold required, as though looking composed had been calculated as an advantage. Wide-brimmed hat. Gray coat. The smile of someone who had decided in advance how the conversation would go. Gideon. Warm. Familiar. 2 years since they'd spoken, and he said the name like they were. Neighbors who'd shared Sunday dinners. Prentice. Cold snaps something fierce. Looking at the cabin, the barn, the fence line. Even the friendly remarks were cataloging. It's December, Gideon said. In Wyoming, true enough. The gaze completed its circuit and came back to Gideon's face. Mind if I come in? My hands are half frozen. I'm in the middle of something. This shouldn't take long. A small recalibration behind Prentice's eyes. Of course. I'll come straight to it. I'm doing welfare checks through the northern homesteads. After that storm, concerns about anyone caught out. Travelers. Indians who might have come this far north before things turned. He said Indians with the mild benevolence of someone who believed the word was generous. Haven't seen anyone, Gideon said. No. Prentice looked at the cabin. At the barn. At the 2 sets of boot prints going to the wood pile. Gideon had made 2 trips this morning, deliberately offset. Getting on all right out here alone, Prentice said. After all this time. Admirable, I manage. The offer still stands. North 40. Price has only improved with the railroad interest. He spread his hands slightly. Reasonable man. Just helping, I'll keep that in mind, Gideon said. Which meant no. And Prentice knew it. And both men knew the other knew. Prentice looked at him. And for one moment, the warmth dropped. Just enough. Enough for Gideon to see what lived underneath it. Not malice. Malice would have been cleaner. What was underneath the smile was certainty. The bedrock certainty of a man who had never encountered an obstacle that did not eventually move. Stubbornness has its seasons, Prentice said. Out here especially. A man alone. You want to be careful about the obligations you take on. The associations you form. He swung up into the saddle. I'll be checking back, he said. Soon. For the welfare, tipped his hat. You take care. He rode back the way he'd come. Gideon watched him until he cleared the fence and turned south, then went inside. Dessa and Ama were already out of the root cellar. He didn't come to check on you, Dessa said. No. He came to see if you'd lie to his face. Yes, did it cost you anything? Gideon took off his coat, hung it. Considered the question honestly. Not as much as I expected, he said. Dessa looked at him, then he looked at your barn. From the track. I was watching through the root cellar gap. He spent more time on the barn than the cabin. Gideon turned. He and Dessa looked at each other. He put his coat back on, went to the barn. She followed. They found it in the northeast corner, behind the grain sacks. In the snow that had drifted under the baseboard gap. Snow that was packed, not fresh. Tracked through before today. 2 sets of footprints, small, deliberate. The depth of men who knew how to move quietly. Someone had been here. Before Prentice arrived, he'd sent men first, then come himself to read Gideon's face. He moved the grain sacks, nothing missing, nothing disturbed. But there, wedged in the corner, a small metal disc. No bigger than a shirt button. Stamped with a number, survey marker, railroad land assessment. Prentice hadn't sent men to look for the women. He'd sent men to confirm this barn, this ground, this exact location fell within the right coordinates. Gideon closed his fist around the disc, very small, very cold, meaning something very large. He already has the survey done, Gideon said. Dessa looked at the disk. Before he came to you about the North 40, she said. He already knew what was here. He was just waiting for everyone standing on it, too. She stopped to cease to be a problem. The wind pushed at the barn walls. Abel shifted in his stall. The letters, Gideon said. We need copies. Multiple routes? Dessa said immediately. Yes. She was already ahead of him. He could see it. The way her mind was working through branches and contingencies. The same way she'd mapped the ridge, changed the pattern, read the boot prints. Ama writes clearest, she said. But she needs her rest. Tomorrow, Gideon said. Tomorrow. They went back inside. He set the survey disc on the table next to Prentice's folded letter. Two small objects, ordinary looking. Between them, the weight of what one man with enough certainty could do to a landscape. To the people on it, Ama looked at the disc. Then at Gideon, then at Dessa. He was here, she said. And his men before him, Dessa said. Ama was quiet a moment. Then she picked up her pencil. We should work tonight, she said. While we have the light. They worked through that evening, and into the next day. Ama copied each letter in her clear, careful hand. 3 sets different paper, organized by date. Dessa organized the originals back into the leather fold. Gideon made a second leather wrap. From scrap hide in the tack room, stitching it with the waxed thread he used for harness repair. And something happened during those hours that had nothing to do with the work exactly. Dessa asked him to hold the leather while she stitched a reinforcing seam. His hands were right there, large and calloused, close to hers. Neither of them commented on it. Ama looked up from her writing and had a small private expression that she put away quickly when she noticed Gideon noticing. He chose not to investigate that expression. He was a man who had lived alone for 7 years. He understood certain things about himself. The main one being that he was not equipped for the kinds of conversations that required him to say out loud what he was currently feeling. He was good at working. Being present. Showing up. He was not good at the other thing, whatever the other thing was. He focused on the leather stitching that night. Late. After Ama slept. The lamps low. Dessa at the table and Gideon. At the stove, and the silence between them, the kind that had been there long enough to become comfortable. Tell me about Nora, she said. Not with the appetite some people brought to other people's grief. With the same direct quality she brought to everything. She came from Boston. Gideon said, you said, what else? He looked at the middle distance. She had strong opinions. Not loudly, she didn't need loud. She'd state what she thought, once clearly, then wait. Most of the time she was right. She never once said I told you so about any of it, which was its own form of devastating. He paused. She thought the West was more honest than the East. More honest about what things actually cost, about how much effort it took to stay alive. She said she'd rather be somewhere that told the truth about difficulty than somewhere that hid it behind nice wallpaper. Dessa almost smiled. Almost she would have liked you, Gideon said. Before he'd decided to say it, he did not look at Dessa. He heard her go still. Then, after a moment, what makes you say that? She liked people who meant what they said. A pause. She had no patience for people who performed virtues they didn't have. Dessa was quiet. My mother would have disliked you, she said. He looked up. She was not wrong to distrust men like you, Dessa said. Men from elsewhere who settle land already lived on. Her distrust was earned. Every bit of it, no, Gideon said. She wasn't wrong, but, a pause. She could also recognize when someone was trying, without a script, without an agenda, just trying. He held that. I don't know if trying is enough, he said. It's not, Dessa said. Usually, a beat. But it's where everything starts. Dessa came to stand beside him at the stove the following evening, while he was starting supper, just stood there, which was unusual. She was a woman who was still with purpose, or moving with purpose. Rarely still without reason. Prentice will come back with more people, she said. Soon. The survey disc means he's close to moving. He won't leave loose ends, I know. We need a plan that doesn't require him to be reasonable. He's not going to be reasonable. No. She looked at the fire. But the letters, if they reach the right hands before he moves, we buy time. We buy more than time. She turned. Looked at him directly. We take away the thing he needs most. No one left who can say what he did to get here. Gideon looked at her, at the firelight on her face. At the turquoise beads at her collar, still startling. That specific blue-green that looked like summer, kept somehow. At the 2 long braids, and the strand at her temple she had never once fixed in 10 days. He had stopped noticing the strand. He had started thinking of it as just part of what she looked like. Which was? Well, he was not going to examine that right now, Dessa, he said. Yes, when this is over, when it's resolved. You and Ama will have a choice to make. He paused. I want you to make it freely. I don't want you to feel obligated, she said. Yes. That. She looked at him for a long moment. The last time I made a decision freely, she said, was a long time ago. Before the pressure got so constant, I stopped being able to feel the difference between choosing and surviving. He held that. I think I'm starting to feel the difference again, she said. Here. In this place. A beat. I don't know yet what I'll choose. But I know I want to choose it. That's new? She went back to the table. He turned back to the stove. His hands were doing something he hadn't intended, the slight tremble that had nothing to do with cold. He focused on the pot, outside, Wyoming December wind. Dark inside, the fire, the lamp, the particular warm weight of a place that had been held exactly still for 7 years, and was, slowly, carefully, necessarily, beginning to move again. The 11th night was the quietest, which should have been reassuring, which was not. Gideon lay on the floor with his eyes open, and listened to the quiet and understood, with the instinct of a man who had spent years reading land and weather, that this kind of quiet was not peace. This kind of quiet was preparation. Something was coming. He didn't know when. He didn't know with how many men. But the survey tisk sat on his table next to Prentice's letter, and those 2 small things together told him everything he needed about the timeline. Prentice had the survey. Prentice had the legal authority. Prentice had the patience of a man who had learned that the right moment was worth waiting for. And the right moment was coming soon, because the probability that 2 Apache women had survived a Wyoming storm without help was low enough that the help itself was suspicious. And a suspicious homesteader was a loose thread. Aldous Prentice did not leave loose threads. Gideon got up before the dark lifted. He built the fire low, varied the smoke. He varied it every morning now, and the small satisfaction of disrupting the predictability was real, even when it felt like a minor rebellion against a very large problem. He stood at the north window with his coffee and looked at the ridge. Still, too still. He was still looking when he heard Dessa behind him. You feel it too, she said. Yes, today? Maybe. Or tomorrow. He looked at the tree line. He's done with patience. Waiting is costing him more now than moving. Dessa came to stand beside him. She was wrapped in the spare blanket. Her braids loose from sleep. Still the 2 braids, but soft now. The tight daytime version relaxed into something more like the original shape of them. The turquoise beads at her collar caught the pre-dawn gray and held it a different color. Ama needs 2 more weeks to travel safely, she said. I know, we don't have 2 weeks. No, they stood in the dark cabin with their coffee and the weight of a problem that had more variables than solutions. Then Dessa said, we send the letters today. He looked at her. With who? There's a man. Settlement south of the timber. I saw him when we were moving north. He was hauling supply to Cheyenne. Chiricahua know him. He's moved things for our people before. Carefully. His name Burrell. Ezra Burrell. He drives south every 10 days. He should be leaving soon. You trust him. My elder trusted him. A pause. That's not nothing. Gideon looked at the ridge. This was the moment. The one where you decided whether to keep holding the thing yourself, or put it in motion, and accept you couldn't control where it landed. He hated this moment. He always had. Nora had been better at it. Trusting that done was better than held. He had been the man who held. For 7 years he had been that man. The ridge sat quiet in the pre-dawn. "We send the letters today," he said. Ama was already at the table. Of course she was. The copies organized by date, folded small, the originals in the leather. She looked up when they came in. "Dessa, how much did you hear, Ama?" "Enough." And then she did something that surprised him. She reached under the table and pulled out a fourth copy, different paper, smaller handwriting, folded differently. "This one," she said, setting it apart, "goes to the territorial newspaper. Laramie. There's an editor who has written about Indian removal before." Critically, a pause. Two audiences are harder to silence than one. Gideon looked at the fourth copy, then at Ama. She had been mapping, all this time. Not just land, escape routes, contingencies. The shape of the problem from every angle. Sitting at his table with her pencil, working quietly, while her ribs healed and the rest of them made plans. She had been 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room, including him. "When did you write this one?" he said. 3 days ago, Ama said. Without apology, when Prentice came. "I wanted the option ready." He looked at Dessa. Dessa had the expression of someone who had long ago given up being surprised by her sister and had settled into a steady state of expecting the unexpected. "She does this," Dessa said, "since we were 8 years old." "Has it always worked out?" Gideon said. Small silence. "Usually," Dessa said. Mostly, Ama said at the same moment. They looked at each other. Gideon decided not to ask about the exceptions. They sent Dessa south to find Burrell. Not the plan Gideon initially proposed. His initial plan had her and Ama staying in the cabin while he went. This plan lasted 45 seconds before Dessa dismantled it. 1. Burrell didn't know Gideon. He knew Dessa by sight. Trust for sensitive documents required relationship, not request. 2. A man leaving on horseback from a watched homestead would be followed. A woman on foot through the timber, taking deer paths rather than road, was a different kind of presence. 3. She was faster than him over that terrain and they both knew it. He had listened to all 3 points, then he said, "If something goes wrong, I'll come back," Dessa said. "And if I can't, Ama will know. We have a way." He looked at Dessa. At Ama, there was a world of communication between them that he had no access to and never would. Not because they excluded him, but because some things were built between two people over 26 years of being each other's closest witness, and no amount of goodwill from outside could fully enter it. He handed Dessa the leather fold. The fourth copy then said, and he hadn't planned to say it, it arrived fully formed without his permission, which was happening more often lately. "Come back," Dessa looked at him. Just that. Just those 2 words. His eyes and hers and the winter light from the east window and the copper kettle behind him on its hook. "Yes," she said, and she went. The waiting was its own particular difficulty. Gideon was not good at waiting. He was good at doing physical work, visible results. The honest satisfaction of a life organized around practical outcomes. Waiting was not practical. Waiting was just time passing. While you tried not to think about every way the thing you were waiting on could go wrong. He split wood. More than they needed, considerably more. Ama watched him from the cabin steps, wrapped in Nora's quilt, her legs drawn up. Her dark eyes tracking him with the calm, observational patience of a woman who had decided he was more interesting than she'd initially accounted for. "You do that when you can't fix something," she said. He split another log. "The wood doesn't need fixing," he said. "No, but your hands need to be useful." He set the next log on the block. Looked at her. "She'll be fine," Ama said. "She knows that land. She's run it in worse, I know. But knowing and feeling are different things." He split the log. The pieces fell clean. "Yes," he said. Ama was quiet a moment, then, "Gideon, yes, she trusts you." He set another log. Adjusted his grip. "She doesn't show trust the way most people do," Ama said. "She shows it by doing the thing instead of saying the thing." A pause. "She stayed at the window when Prentice came. She didn't go to the root cellar until she'd read his horse, his posture, the way he tied the reins. She was making sure she'd have everything she needed if something went wrong, and she had to come out and help you. He hadn't known that he'd thought she'd gone immediately. He put the axe down, stood there in the cold with his hands on the handle, and the specific feeling of learning something about a person that rearranges things. She was covering you, Ama said. That's what she does. When she trusts someone, he picked up the axe again. How long did it take her to trust you, he said. Ama thought about it. We've been sisters since before we could think, she said. She's never not trusted me, which is different. A pause. 3 years to trust our elder. 1 season to trust our horses. 7 days to trust you. He set the next log on the block. Stood there. 7 days, he said. 7 days, Ama said, which for Dessa is something of a record. He split the log. The pieces fell clean. He didn't say anything. Because that information had gone somewhere in his chest and was doing something he was not going to examine in the open air in front of Ama. He split 2 more logs. You can stop, Ama said. We have enough wood to last until spring. He looked at the pile. He had, in fact, generated an impressive quantity of firewood. He put the axe in the barn. Dessa came back 3 hours before dark. He heard her before he saw her, the rhythm of her footfall on the crusted snow, which he had learned without intending to learn it. She came from the south edge of the timber, crossing the frozen part of the creek rather than the road. He was at the fence line when he heard her. He turned. She came through the tree line and saw him, and something in her face that had been held tight for 3 hours released. Just slightly. Just enough. He walked toward her and she walked toward him. And she walked toward him, and they met in the middle, snow-covered past chopper like 2 people who had separately arrived at the same decision without discussing it. Burrell takes it tomorrow morning, she said. Cheyenne first. He knows a clerk at the federal court. He'll put it in the right hands. And the newspaper copy? His wife's cousin works at the Laramie paper. He's done this before. A pause. He's careful. Gideon nodded. She looked at him. You split a lot of wood, she said. He looked at the barn. At the considerable evidence of his mourning, I was occupied, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. Almost a smile. Almost. Come inside, he said. You're cold. And they walked back to the cabin together, through the Wyoming December. Prentice came the next morning. Not alone. 3 men with him. Not the polished federal agent presentation of the first visit. These were dressed for work rather than appearance, who spread out as they crossed the fence line without being told to. The movement of people who had done this before. Gideon watched from the window, turned to Dessa, and Ama. Dessa was already standing, her expression clean and still. The way a landscape goes still before something significant changes. Ama was at the table. She closed the leather folder, empty. The paper's gone with Burrell since yesterday morning, and folded her hands on top of it. Unhurried, root cellar? Gideon said. Dessa shook her head. He looked at her. No, she said. Not this time. Something in how she said it. He didn't argue. He went to the door. Prentice knocked once. The kind of knock that expects to be heard and does not see the need to demonstrate patience. Gideon opened the door. Prentice was there. The 3 men positioned, 1 each side of the cabin, 1 at the barn door. Not here to check on welfare. Not pretending to be Gideon. I need to come inside. On what authority? He held up a paper. Official. Sealed. Search warrant. Signed by the county magistrate. The county magistrate, who had gone hunting with Aldous Prentice every October for the past decade, Leligal. In the specific 1883 Wyoming sense of that word. Gideon stepped back from the door. Prentice came in. And stopped, because Dessa and Ama were standing in the center of the room. Not hiding. Not in the root cellar. Standing at the table in the firelight, in their ochre buckskin dresses. The turquoise beadwork catching the lamp, Nora's quilt folded on the chair beside them. 2 women, identical. Looking at Aldous Prentice with a combined attention that had physical weight to it. Prentice stopped. The briefest break in the smooth surface of his composure. Then he recovered. Because men like Prentice always recovered. Well, he said, and then said nothing else for a moment, recalibrating. I see. He looked at Gideon. You lied to me. Yes, Gideon said. That's a federal. I know what it is. Prentice looked at Dessa. At Ama. The calculation running behind his eyes. Adjusting for variables, you understand, he said to them. His voice had shifted, measured but the warmth stripped out. That you're on land legally reassigned by federal order. Your presence here is complicated by the letters, Dessa said. Prentice went still. The letters between yourself and the railroad surveyor, Dessa continued. Dated over 14 months. Predating the removal order by 11 months. A perfectly timed pause. The ones documenting the financial arrangement for the land clearance. Prentice looked at her. At the empty leather folder on the table. At Gideon, his jaw moved once. Those documents, he said carefully, are stolen property. They're evidence, Ama said. From beside her sister, quiet. Absolute. Of what, exactly? Of the fact, Ama said, that the removal order was the end of a plan. Not the beginning of a legal process. She looked at him with the reading attention she brought to everything. You had the survey done before you asked Gideon to sell. Before you filed the order. The plan was the plan before the law was the law. Prentice looked at the table at the folder's emptiness, which was telling him exactly what he needed to know. Where are they? He said. Not a question. Safe, Dessa said. You don't know what you've. Yes, we do, Dessa said. That's precisely the problem you have. And there it was. The warmth dropped entirely from Aldous Prentice's face. Not anger. Anger would have been cleaner. This was colder. The recalculation of a man who had planned for many variables and had not quite planned for this one. He looked at Gideon. You're throwing away everything, he said. Your land. You're standing. I want to ask you something, Gideon said. Prentice stopped. You came to this cabin 2 years ago, Gideon said. You looked at everything in it, made me an offer. We're very polite about the whole thing. I was. Did you look at the people on the land the same way you looked at the land? Gideon said. Or just as things that needed relocating before the real work could start? Prentice was quiet. The progress of civilization, he began. Stop, Gideon said, one word. But it landed like something solid. Prentice stopped. My wife came to Wyoming, Gideon said, because she believed land was something you lived with, rather than moved through, on the way to a profit. She's buried on this ground. She'd have said what I'm about to say better than I'm going to say it. He looked at Prentice steadily. Dessa's grandmother was born 3 miles from here. Ama knows where the spring water runs underground on this property. Knows it because generations of her family read this ground before my family arrived and called it empty. A pause. I'm not throwing away anything by standing here. I'm doing the first honest thing I've done in 7 years. The fire, the wind, the lamp. Prentice stood in the cabin with the warrant in his hand and the empty folder on the table and the knowledge. Gideon could see him arriving at it, that the letters were already in motion. Whatever he did in this cabin today was already too late. Men like Prentice were accustomed to winning. But they were also, when the situation required it, accustomed to strategic retreat. You'll hear from the federal office, Prentice said. I expect so, Gideon said. Prentice folded his warrant, put it in his coat, looked at Dessa, who met his gaze with the directness of someone who had stopped being afraid of him at a specific moment and had not gone back. At Ama, who had already looked away, was already looking at the map on the table, already 3 steps ahead. Prentice walked out. The door closed. Gideon listened to the horses leaving. Listened until the sound was gone and only the wind remained. Then he turned. Dessa had her arms at her sides. The posture of someone who had been very still for a long time and was now, carefully, releasing it. Ama exhaled. Long like she had been saving it. That's done. Dessa said that part. Gideon said, yes. A pause. That part? The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not simple because Prentice was not finished and they all knew it. He filed a complaint with the federal office. There were letters. Official responses to be drafted. Gideon made 2 trips to the county seat. Once with Dessa, once alone. Each time he came back with more paperwork, and the exhaustion of navigating a system that had not been built with him in mind, or with Dessa and Ama in mind at all. But the letters had arrived in Cheyenne. Burrell was careful. The clerk was careful. The documents reached the federal court with the proper signatures and the particular detail that made Prentice's arrangement visible as an arrangement rather than a legal process. Nothing resolved immediately. Nothing like this resolved immediately, but it created friction. Enough friction that Prentice's timeline expanded. Survey markers came down while the investigation was pending. The methodical, legal-looking pressure he'd been applying to the north end of the territory paused, just paused. Paused was something. Paused meant time, and time meant spring. January gave way to February. February was brutal the way Wyoming February always is. The cold stopped being weather and became something with intent. But the cabin was warm. The considerable, frankly excessive quantity of firewood Gideon had split kept the fire going. Ama healed completely. One morning in late January, she stood up from the table and walked across the cabin and turned and walked back without managing anything. Without the careful breath work she'd been doing for weeks. She stood in the middle of the room with her arms at her sides and looked mildly triumphant. There, she said. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Dessa said, "About time," and Ama threw a dish towel at her, which hit Dessa in the face, which Dessa had not been expecting, which produced a sound that Gideon, who did not have better language for this, could only describe as almost certainly a laugh, quickly suppressed, but present. He had not heard Dessa laugh before. He had not known it sounded like that. He turned back to the stove because his face was doing something he did not want witnessed. The conversation about what came next happened on a February evening. The 3 of them at the table after supper, the way they were every evening. The shape of 3 people who had been in the same space long enough that the space had arranged itself around all 3 of them. Ama said, "Word came this morning." Gideon looked up from Burrell. Through his wife's cousin. "Some of our people, a group, they made it south. Arizona Territory." She looked at the table. Then at Dessa. "They're settled. Temporarily. But alive. The fire, the lamp." Dessa looked at her sister for a long time. "How many?" she said. "Enough," Ama said quietly. "Not everyone, but enough." A silence with several layers. The relief layer. The grief underneath. The complicated texture of surviving something others did not, and having to hold both truths at once. Gideon sat with that. He understood something about holding both things at once. 7 years of practice. "You can reach them," he said. "When the road's clear." "Yes," Dessa said. "You could go south." Yes, the word sat there. He didn't add to it. Because she hadn't. Because he was learning her grammar. The unspoken rest of a sentence was not absence. It was a room he was not being told to stay out of, but was not being told to enter either. "There are people who need you there," he said. "Yes, and there are things here that are unresolved." "Yes, those 2 things don't cancel each other out." Dessa looked at him. Long. "No," she said. "They don't." Ama had the small private expression she sometimes had. The one she usually put away before it could be read. She didn't put it away quickly enough this time. Gideon chose, as he had many times, not to investigate it. Ama spoke after Dessa had gone to the sleeping area. Just the 2 of them. Ama with her maps, Gideon with his coffee. The quiet of late Wyoming evening when the wind was the only thing moving. "She won't make it easy for you," Ama said. Without looking up, "I know. Not because the feeling isn't there." He held his coffee. "Because she doesn't know yet how to trust something good without waiting for it to become something bad," Ama said. "She's been right to wait, most of her life. She protected me by learning not to need things. Not to rely on things." A pause. "You understand?" "Yes," Gideon said. "I think I do. You spent 7 years not needing things either." He looked at his hands. "Yes." "So you understand," Ama said. The difficulty of being around someone who makes you want to need things again. Not knowing whether that wanting is hope or just hunger. The fire, the wind. How do you know the difference? He said. Ama put down her pencil, looked at him. Hope makes you want to build something, she said. Hunger just wants to be fed. A pause. You want to build something. I've been watching you. You've been building things since the first day we were here. He looked at the cabin, at the reorganized tool shelf, at Nora's quilt on the chair being used, at the map Ama had drawn, pinned to the wall now, the spring location marked. At the 2 chairs at the table, both in use. What does she want to build? He said. Ama picked up her pencil, looked at her drawing. Ask her, she said. She might actually answer. She's been practicing, he asked her the next morning. She was at the east window where she always started the day. He came to stand beside her, the way he did sometimes. Not every morning, but sometimes. The small ritual they had built without naming it. I want to ask you something, he said. Yes. When the road's clear, he said. When you can reach your people. What do you want to do? Dessa looked at the ridge. At the pale February sky. At the thin line of smoke from the cabin's own chimney, visible from this angle if you knew where to look. I want to go south, she said, and see that our people are alive with my own eyes. A pause, and I want to come back. He stood with the cold light of the window, her profile, the 2 long braids and the 1 strand at her temple that she had never fixed. Both, she said. Not one or the other. She looked at him. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, he said. Both, she said again, like she was deciding it, by saying it. I go, I come back. And whatever this is, we find out what it is. Without a crisis underneath it, he looked out the window, at the fence line he still needed to repair, at the North 40 Prentice still had claims on, at all the ordinary, unresolved difficulty of 43 acres of Wyoming ground. I should tell you, he said, that I'm not an easy person. I've been alone for 7 years, and I have Gideon. Yes, I have lived 26 years with the United States government as a neighbor, she said. You are not going to be the most difficult thing in my life. He almost laughed, almost, which was closer than he'd been in 7 years. All right, he said. All right, she said. And that was. That the most low-key, undramatic, absolutely Wyoming conclusion to an enormously significant conversation that had ever occurred in this territory. He went to make coffee. She stayed at the window another moment. Then she went to get Ama up. March came, not arriving so much as negotiating. It offered a warm day, then took it back. Gave a week of thaw, then 3 days of snow to remind everyone who was in charge. Teased mud out of the frozen ground, then froze it again. But it came. And with it, the roads cleared enough. Burrell made a run south. Room for 2 passengers to a settlement near the Arizona border. From there, Dessa and Ama could reach their people. He sent word the morning they were to leave. Gideon was at the stove, which was where he was when things happened that he needed his hands occupied for. Ama came out first, her traveling bundle over one shoulder. Moving fully properly, without the management she'd been doing for months. She stopped in the middle of the cabin and looked around it, at the map on the wall. At the tool shelf, she'd never touched, but had almost certainly evaluated, at Nora's quilt on the chair. She walked to the chair, picked up the quilt, carried it to Gideon. He turned from the stove. She held it out to him. You should have this back, she said. He shook his head. Ama, it should be on the bed, she said. Used, not stored. On the bed as a thing that is part of a life being lived. She looked at him steadily. That's what she would want. You know that. He stood there with the quilt in his hands. Yes, he knew that. He had always known it. He folded it, not the way he'd folded it for 7 years. Corners squared, edges matched, the careful maintenance of a preserved thing. But the loose fold of something between uses. Something that would be unfolded again soon. He set it at the foot of the bed. Ama watched him. Then, there's something growing near the east fence post. I planted it 2 weeks ago when there was a thaw day. You'll see it in April. Maybe May, what is it? Something my grandmother showed me. High ground plant. Blue flowers in summer, she paused, small, but persistent. He looked at her, at this woman who had spent the worst weeks of her life in his cabin, and had, in the margins of all of it, planted something in his ground. Thank you, he said, which was not sufficient. But was the word he had, thank you, she said back, with the weight she brought to things that mattered to her. Then she went to the door. Dessa was there. Of course. She'd been at the east window. She turned when Ama touched her arm. Something passed between them, quick. Wordless. Complete. Then Dessa walked to where Gideon was standing. Stopped in front of him. She was wearing the ochre buckskin dress. The fringe clean now. The ice long gone, the turquoise beads bright in the morning light. The silver at her collar, her braids tight for travel, and the strand at her temple, for once. For this particular moment, tucked back. She looked at him. He looked at her. 2 months, she said. Maybe 3. Depending on the roads coming back. I'll fix the north fence while you're gone, he said. And the barn roof. There's a section that's been... Gideon, yes. I'm not leaving because of the barn roof, I know. I'm leaving because my people need me to see that they're alive with my own eyes. A pause. And I'm coming back, because this is a place that is becoming something. And I want to see what it becomes. He nodded. She held out her hand. He looked at it. He took it. Briefly, both of his around hers. The warmth of it in the cold morning cabin. She looked at their hands, then at him. Don't split all the wood in Wyoming while on, she said. And there it was, not almost a smile, actual, real. The smile she'd been keeping somewhere underneath everything for 2 months of Wyoming winter. And he had not seen it until this exact second. He held it in his chest like a coal, like something that would keep throwing heat long after the initial spark had done what sparks do. I'll try, he said. She let go, walked to the door, and out. He stood in the cabin after they'd gone, sounds fading, hoofbeats on the thawed road. The silence that comes after departure. Different from the silence before departure. Different from all other silence. He looked at the room, the tool shelf, the chairs, the map on the wall, the quilt at the foot of the bed, loosely folded, available, the copper kettle, the sewing basket, all of Nora's things in their places. But the space around them had changed. The space had people in it. The shapes of people who had been here. The reshaping a place undergoes when it has been genuinely occupied, genuinely lived in, rather than preserved. He put on his coat, went out to the fence line. The Wyoming March air was cold but different. Cold in the direction of warm. Cold that had turned a corner without announcing it. He walked the north pasture. His boots left prints in snow, beginning to granulate at the surface. The sign of melt starting from underneath. From the core of things rather than the surface. He stopped at the east fence post. Looked at the ground. No visible sign of what Ama had planted. Too early. Too much snow still patched at the base of the post, but he knew it was there. He crouched. Pressed his hand against the ground the way Ama had shown him at the creek. Feeling for what was underneath rather than what was visible, he felt it barely. The faint give of ground thawing from within, something below the frozen surface. Not nothing, the opposite of nothing. He stood, looked south, the direction they'd gone, then at the cabin. Smoke from the chimney he'd built the fire in before coming out. The gray wood of the walls. The windows catching pale March light. 43 acres of Wyoming ground. His end? He was beginning to understand. Not only his. Never had been only his. Not since the first day. Nora had looked at it and seen what it wanted to grow. Not since Dessa had mapped the creek approach in her mind while running through a blizzard. Not since Ama had pressed her foot into the snow beside the east fence post and known the water was there. The land did not belong to the person who held the paper. The land belonged, in some more fundamental sense, to the people who understood it. He walked back to the cabin. At the door, he stopped, looked at the east window. Empty now, but not empty the way it had been empty before. Empty like a space maintained for a presence that would not return, like a room held open for someone who had already left for good. Now, empty like a pause between sentences, like a chair someone has just left and will return to, like morning before the day has properly begun, temporary, expecting to be filled. He went inside, made fresh coffee, put 2 cups on the table, one for now, one for later. For the practice of expecting company rather than bracing against the absence of it, he sat down. He picked up his cup outside. Wyoming March. Still cold. Getting warmer. The fence line that needed fixing. The barn roof with its bad section. The east fence post with something dormant in the ground beside it. Waiting for April, maybe May. Blue flowers in summer. Small but persistent. Inside, the fire. The lamp. The copper kettle, Nora's sewing basket, the map on the wall, the quilt at the foot of the bed differently folded, and Gideon Marsh, 40 years old, sitting at his table with 2 cups and a Wyoming morning, and the unfamiliar, tentative sensation of a man who had spent 7 years keeping everything exactly as it was, and had just, without quite planning to, begun to let things change. He had told himself it was devotion, keeping everything, holding the shape of her, exactly as she had left it. He had believed that for 7 years. Standing now in the cabin that had held 3 people through the worst winter in recent memory, that still held the smell of their presence, the rearrangement of its own furniture, the map pinned to the wall that had never been there before. He understood it had been something else. It had been fear, not of forgetting Nora. He would never forget Nora. Fear of what he was, without the shape of her to lean against. She had not asked him to stop. She had asked him, in every way she knew how, to keep going. He just had not been ready to hear it. He picked up the second cup, held it, set it down, left it there waiting, 5 months later. May 1884, the blue flowers came up in May, small, persistent, exactly as promised. He was at the east fence post, doing the repair work he had been working through, methodically all spring, when he took a look and found them. 5 small plants, tight blue flowers, the color of something that had decided to be here, regardless of what winter had thought of that plan. He crouched down. He thought about Ama's grandmother, about what it meant to carry knowledge across generations, to press a foot into frozen ground and know what was underneath, to plant something in the worst winter of your life, because you understood that ground remembered, and spring always came, and small persistent things outlasted everything that tried to make them stop. He thought about Nora, her honest quilt, her uneven weave, the way she always finished what she started. He thought about Dessa. 2 months, she'd said. Maybe 3. It had been almost 2. He stood, looked south at a road, at the shape of the horizon that you learn to read when you are waiting for something to come from a specific direction. Nothing yet, but the blue flowers were there, and the for now was enough.